A piece of paper torn in two. A single act of malice at an airport gate. But this wasn't just any piece of paper. It was a work visa belonging to a woman who held the key to a global tech revolution. The gate agent thought she was putting a difficult passenger in her place. What she actually did was light a fuse. With one calm phone call, that passenger didn't just file a complaint. She froze $1 billion of the airline stock, triggering a corporate meltdown and a storm of karma that would be felt from the check-in desk to the boardroom. Dr. Alani Reed believed in the quiet efficiency of airports. They were liminal spaces, non-places where the normal rules of the world were temporarily suspended in favor of a universal code of conduct. Q. Present documents. Board. Depart. It was a system she, a systems engineer by training and temperament, could appreciate. On this crisp Tuesday morning at JFK International Airport's Terminal 4, however, a variable she hadn't accounted for was about to corrupt the entire system. The air hummed with the controlled chaos of travel. The scent of stale coffee, perfume, and jet fuel hung in the recycled air. Alani, dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer, comfortable but chic trousers, and practical yet elegant leather flats, stood in the priority boarding line for transatlantic air flight 101 to London Heathrow. She held her passport and boarding pass in one hand, the leather of her document wallet cool against her skin. Inside that wallet, nestled safely, was her Tier 2 work visa for the United Kingdom, the culmination of months of paperwork and the golden ticket to the next, most critical phase of her career. At 32, Alani was a prodigy in the world of quantum computing. With a PhD from MIT and a string of patents that had made established tech giants sit up and take notice, she was the lead architect of Project Chimera, a revolutionary quantum AI initiative. The project was a joint venture between the US-based tech conglomerate, Etheria Solutions, and the British government. Its potential was staggering, capable of solving problems in medicine, climate science, and finance that were currently insurmountable. The project's value wasn't just in its intellectual property, it represented a $20 billion investment, with the first major hardware installation scheduled to go live in a secure facility outside London in 72 hours. Alani was the only person with the complete set of activation protocols. She was the key. She was also a black woman, and in the complex, often unwritten social code of public spaces, this sometimes felt like a pre-existing condition. She'd learned to navigate the world with a placid, almost detached grace, a defense mechanism against the low-grade static of bias she frequently encountered. She kept her expression neutral, her voice modulated, her movements deliberate. She made herself unthreatening, unimpeachable. Usually it worked. Today, the gate agent was a woman in her late 50s named Sharon. She had a tight perm of brassy blonde hair, glasses perched on the end of her nose, and a name tag that read, Sharon Miller, Customer Service Supervisor. Her lipstick was a shade of coral that was too bright for her sallow skin, and it was feathered into the fine lines around her mouth. She was processing passengers with a mechanical, joyless efficiency. But as Alani stepped forward, a subtle shift occurred in Sharon's demeanor. Her movements slowed, her eyes narrowed. The practiced, impersonal smile she'd given the white businessman in front of Alani vanished, replaced by a flat, appraising stare. "Passport and boarding pass," Sharon said, her voice clipped. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Alani handed them over. "Good morning," she offered, her voice calm and pleasant. Sharon didn't return the greeting. Her eyes flicked from the passport photo to Alani's face and back again. She ran the passport through the scanner. Beep. She then scrutinized the boarding pass, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the countertop. "You're in business class," Sharon stated. It wasn't a question. The tone was one of faint surprise, as if a clerical error had been made. "Yes, that's right," Alani replied, keeping her own tone perfectly level. She knew this script. She had played this part before. The surprise that she could afford the ticket, the unspoken questions about how she got it. Sharon grunted. She then looked at her screen, typing with 2 index fingers, her brow furrowed in concentration. The line behind Alani was growing, a shuffle of impatient feet and sighs. "Purpose of your travel to the United Kingdom?" Sharon asked, her eyes still glued to the monitor. "Work," Alani said simply. "What kind of work?" The question was sharper now, more pointed. It was beyond the standard security patter. "I'm an engineer." This seemed to pique Sharon's interest. She finally looked up from her screen, her gaze sweeping over Alani's designer blazer, her polished appearance. The look was one of deep-seated skepticism, as if the word engineer and the person in front of her were two puzzle pieces that didn't fit. "An engineer," Sharon repeated, drawing the word out. "Right, I'm going to need to see your visa." This was not standard procedure. The visa would be checked by immigration upon arrival in the UK, not by an airline gate agent in New York. The airline's only job was to ensure the passenger had a valid passport and a ticket for travel. But Alani knew better than to argue. Arguing would only escalate the situation, mark her as difficult, aggressive. It was a label she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. With a placid expression still locked in place, she opened her document wallet and produced the UK Tier 2 visa. It was a crisp, official document, stamped and embossed, a physical representation of her brilliance and the immense value the British government placed on her presence in their country. She handed it to Sharon. The gate agent snatched it from her fingers, her touch rough. She held the document up to the light, turning it over and over, her lips pursed in a thin, disapproving line. She ran a thumb over the official seal as if checking for a forgery. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Alani could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. She felt the familiar heat of humiliation, a slow burn starting in her chest. She was being singled out, made a spectacle of for no reason other than the color of her skin and a gate agent's sour disposition. "This is a very impressive visa," Sharon said at last, though the word impressive dripped with sarcasm. "Says here you're a person of exceptional talent." She looked at Alani, a smirk playing on her lips. What kind of exceptional talent would that be? Alani's calm was a fortress she had built brick by brick over a lifetime of such encounters. She would not let this woman breach its walls. "My talent," Alani said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet clear as a bell, "is in building the future. Now if you're satisfied, I'd like to board my flight. I have a rather important schedule to keep." The politeness, the quiet authority in Alani's voice seemed to infuriate Sharon more than any outburst would have. It was a rejection of the role Sharon had assigned her. To Sharon, power was a uniform and a name tag, and the ability to make people wait. How could this woman, this black woman in a fancy blazer, possess a power that was quiet, internal, and utterly unassailable? A malicious glint entered Sharon's eyes. It was a look of petty tyranny, the kind wielded by those who have little power in their own lives and relish the opportunity to exercise it over others. She looked down at the visa in her hand, then up at Alani, and then back at the visa. And then, with a single deliberate movement, she tore it in half. The sound was shockingly loud in the relative quiet of the standoff. A sharp, violent rip that seemed to tear the very air. The two halves of the visa fluttered from her fingers and landed on the counter, a testament to an act of breathtaking malice. "Oops," Sharon said, her voice oozing false sincerity. "Clumsy me." She looked Alani dead in the eye, a triumphant, ugly smile spreading across her face. "Looks like you won't be going to London today, or anytime soon." For the first time, Alani's fortress wavered. A wave of cold shock washed over her. The ripped document on the counter wasn't just paper. It was her future. It was the linchpin of a multi-billion-dollar project. It was the trust of two nations. And this woman, with her cheap perfume and bitter heart, had destroyed it with a flick of her wrist. The other passengers gasped. A man behind Alani muttered, "Oh my God, did you see that?" But no one moved. No one spoke up. They were all part of the system, and the system dictated that they not get involved. Alani stared at the two pieces of her visa. The world seemed to slow down. The hum of the terminal faded into a dull roar. In that moment, Something inside her shifted. The placid grace, the carefully constructed calm. It didn't break, but it solidified. It hardened into something else, something cold, sharp, and absolute. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply looked at Sharon, her dark eyes holding the gate agent's gaze with an intensity that made the other woman's smirk falter. Then she reached into her purse, her movements still unhurried, and retrieved her phone. With Sharon and the silent, watching crowd as her audience, she made a single call. She didn't need to look up the number. A voice answered on the first ring, a voice accustomed to power and immediate action. Alani's words were quiet, but they carried the weight of an earthquake about to happen. "Marcus," she said, "we have a problem. It's about Project Chimera. Yes, a transatlantic air employee. At JFK. Her name is Sharon Miller. She just destroyed my visa." She paused, listening. "I understand," she said. "Do what you have to do." She ended the call. She didn't look at Sharon again. She simply stood there, a figure of profound and unnerving stillness, and waited. She knew she wouldn't have to wait long. The system she believed in had been corrupted. Now, she was going to reboot it. For a few seconds after the call ended, a fragile, tense silence held sway at Gate B23. It was as if Alani's calm had imposed a bubble around the immediate area. Sharon Miller, for her part, was momentarily flustered. The sheer audacity of the passenger, to stand there and make a phone call as if she were reporting a leaky faucet, not the destruction of a federal document, was baffling. Sharon's bravado, however, quickly reasserted itself. She was the supervisor. She was in control. This was her kingdom of linoleum floors and retractable barriers. "Making a phone call isn't going to change anything," Sharon sneered, crossing her arms. She gestured dismissively at the torn visa. "That's destroyed. You have no valid travel documents for entry into the UK. You are denied boarding. I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the line and go back to the check-in counter. Maybe they can help you." The implication was clear. "You're no longer my problem." She expected Alani to argue, to plead, to break down. That's what people did when their plans were shattered. It was a small, ugly perk of the job, seeing the composure of the rich and self-important crumble. But Alani did none of those things. She simply held her ground, her gaze fixed on a point just over Sharon's shoulder, as if she were watching something only she could see. "I don't think that will be necessary," Alani said, her voice still unnervingly placid. "I believe my assistance will be required here very shortly." This infuriated Sharon. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Get out of the line. You're holding everyone up." She raised her voice, trying to rally the other passengers to her side. "This passenger has invalid documents and is refusing to move." A few people shuffled their feet, but most looked away, embarrassed and intimidated by the raw animosity of the scene. The businessman who had been in front of Alani just shook his head and retreated a few steps, wanting no part of the explosion he felt was imminent. What happened next was not the explosion Sharon anticipated. It was something quieter, faster, and infinitely more powerful. Less than 90 seconds after Alani's call had ended, a phone rang. It wasn't a passenger's phone. It was the red phone, the direct line from the Operations Control Center, OCC, to the gate supervisor's desk. This phone rarely rang. It was used for emergencies, security threats, medical crises, imminent flight cancellations. Its shrill, insistent ring cut through the terminal's din. Sharon's head snapped toward the sound. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance, crossed her face. Who would be calling her now? She stomped over to the desk, snatching the receiver. "Gate B23, Miller speaking," she barked into the phone. She listened. Her posture changed. The self-important arch of her back began to sag. Her face, already pale, seemed to lose what little color it had. "What?" "Say that again," she said, her voice now a strained squeak. She listened again, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No, that's not possible. What do you mean, a no-fly order?" Alani watched, her expression unchanging. She knew Marcus Thorne. She had known him since he was a brash, brilliant coder at Stanford, and she was a visiting fellow from MIT. Now Marcus was the CEO of Etheria Solutions, the multi-billion-dollar tech giant bankrolling the American half of Project Chimera. He was a man who measured time in nanoseconds and problems in terms of their computational complexity. A gate agent destroying the visa of his lead architect was not a complex problem. It was an obstacle. And Marcus Thorne did not tolerate obstacles. On the other end of the line, the voice from the OCC was frantic, relaying information that was making no sense. "I don't know what's going on, Sharon. We're getting a direct order from the executive suite. A Mr. Harrison, Senior VP of North American Operations," he said, and I'm quoting here, "Ground Transatlantic Air Flight 101. No one gets on, no one gets off. And find a supervisor named Sharon Miller at Gate B23. Detain her." "Detain me?" Sharon screeched, her voice cracking. "Detain me for what?" But the voice from OCC was just as confused. "I have no idea, but it gets worse. Wall Street is lighting up. Our stock, something's happening to our stock." At that exact moment, a different kind of alert began to cascade through the airline's corporate nervous system. In the gleaming Manhattan skyscraper that served as Transatlantic Air's headquarters, men and women in expensive suits began to see frantic notifications flashing on their trading terminals. A massive institutional sell order for Transatlantic Air stock, ticker TAA, had just been placed. Not a few thousand shares, not even 1,000,000. The order was a block trade of such immense size that it triggered an automatic circuit breaker. The New York Stock Exchange, by its own rules, was forced to halt all trading of TAA stock to prevent a catastrophic price collapse. The amount frozen, the value of the shares held in that suspended state of sale, was just north of $1 billion. The order had been placed by the Etheria Solutions Corporate Investment Fund. It was a declaration of war. Back at Gate B23, Sharon was still stammering into the red phone when two men in dark suits, their airport security credentials clipped to their lapels, arrived, moving with a purpose that set them apart from the wandering travelers. They were followed by a flustered-looking man in a rumpled airline manager's uniform, whose name tag identified him as David Chen, the Terminal 4 duty manager. David's face was slick with sweat. He had just been on the receiving end of a phone call from the senior VP, a man he had never spoken to in his life. The call had been short, brutal, and terrifying. "Sharon Miller?" one of the security men asked, his voice low and firm. Sharon dropped the red phone. It swung on its cord, clattering against the side of the desk. She stared at the men, then at David Chen, then at Alani, who was still standing there, a silent, powerful observer. "Yes?" Sharon whispered. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the security man said. It was not a request. "Come with you where? I haven't done anything wrong," she insisted, her voice rising with panic. "It was her. This passenger, she didn't have a valid visa." She pointed a trembling finger at Alani, grabbing for the torn pieces on the counter to prove her point. David Chen, the duty manager, flinched as if she had pointed a loaded gun. He looked at Alani with a new dawning horror. He had been given one very specific instruction from the senior VP. Find the passenger Miss Miller had an issue with. Apologize to her. Give her whatever she wants. Do not, under any circumstances, let her leave that gate until I get there myself. The fate of this airline might depend on it. Ignoring Sharon completely, David Chen scurried over to Alani. He was bowing his head slightly, his hands clasped in front of him in a gesture of supplication. "Ma'am," he began, his voice trembling, "my name is David Chen. I am the duty manager for this terminal. On behalf of Transatlantic Air, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for whatever just occurred here. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding." Alani finally turned her gaze from the middle distance and focused on him. Her eyes were like polished obsidian. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice soft. "Your employee, Miss Miller, just deliberately destroyed a government-issued document essential for a multi-billion-dollar international project. She did it because she didn't like the look of me. That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding, Mr. Chen. It sounds like a choice. Sharon watched, dumbfounded, as the full authority of the airline, in the form of her own boss, groveled before the woman she had just tried to humiliate. The world had turned upside down. The power dynamic she had so viciously enforced had not just been reversed, it had been annihilated. The two security men stepped forward, gently but inexorably taking Sharon by the arms. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." "No!" Sharon shrieked, finally realizing the depth of the trouble she was in. She tried to pull away. "You can't do this. I'm the supervisor. I have rights." As she was being escorted away from the gate, past the stunned faces of the passengers, her frantic eyes met Alani's one last time. In Alani's gaze there was no triumph, no anger, no satisfaction. There was only the cold, hard emptiness of a system that had been broken and was now, with ruthless efficiency, being set right. The tremor had passed. The earthquake was just beginning. The boardroom on the 50th floor of the Transatlantic Air Building in Midtown Manhattan was a sanctuary of hushed tones, polished mahogany, and panoramic city views. It was designed to project an aura of calm, unshakable control. At this moment, it was the epicenter of a corporate earthquake, and the calm was a distant memory. James Harrison, the senior vice president of North American operations, paced the length of the room like a caged panther. He was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a face accustomed to command. But right now, that face was ashen. His tie was loosened, his jacket slung over a chair. In one hand he clutched a phone to his ear, listening to the transatlantic fury of Transatlantic's CEO Sir Richard Powell, who was patched in from London. "Let me be clear, James." Powell's voice crackled, sharp with aristocratic rage. "I have just had the British Home Secretary on my personal line. Not an aide, not a deputy. The Home Secretary himself. He informed me that the lead architect of their most critical joint technology venture with the Americans has been assaulted, harassed, her legal documents destroyed by one of our staff." "Richard, we are still gathering the facts," Harrison began, but Powell cut him off. "Facts. I'll give you a fact, James. Etheria Solutions, our new corporate partner for the Silicon Valley route expansion, the people we've been courting for 6 months, has just dumped $1 billion of our stock onto the market. $1 billion. The NYSE had to suspend trading to stop us from free-falling into oblivion. Our market cap has plummeted by 20% in the last 30 minutes, based on that action alone. The financial press is calling it a corporate attack." Harrison winced. He looked at the other people in the room, the head of legal, Maria Flores, the head of corporate communications, Ben Carter, and the chief financial officer, Michael Sterling. They all looked as though they'd been struck by lightning. "Who the hell is this passenger?" Michael Sterling, the CFO, demanded, his face pale. "How can one person trigger this kind of fallout?" Before Harrison could answer, his assistant burst into the room, breathless. "Sir, I have Marcus Thorne on line 2. He's the CEO of Etheria Solutions." James Harrison felt a fresh wave of ice water in his veins. "Put him through," he commanded, gesturing for the room to be silent. He took a deep breath and activated the speakerphone. Marcus Thorne's voice filled the room. It was young, cold, and utterly devoid of pleasantries. "Harrison, you have 60 seconds to explain to me why my lead quantum architect is being detained at JFK by your incompetent staff." "Mr. Thorne, I assure you Dr. Reed is not being detained," Harrison said, trying to sound soothing and in control. "There was an incident with a staff member who has been removed from her post and is currently with security. The duty manager is with Dr. Reed now, extending our full apologies." "Apologies." The word was laced with derision. "Your staff member, a supervisor named Sharon Miller, committed a hate crime. She racially profiled my top scientist and then, in an act of what I can only describe as staggering stupidity, destroyed a UK Tier 2 exceptional talent visa. That visa is not just a piece of paper, Harrison. It's the key. Without Dr. Alani Reed in London within the next 48 hours, the primary activation sequence for Project Chimera fails." The CFO, Michael Sterling, gasped. He knew about Project Chimera. The whispers in the financial world were that it was a game changer, a technology so advanced it would redefine global power. What does that mean? Fails? Sterling asked, his voice barely a whisper. It means, Marcus Thorne continued, his voice like chipping ice, a $20 billion project, co-funded by us and Her Majesty's government, goes dark. It means a 5-year setback in quantum AI development. It means the satellite communication hardware we just paid your air freight division $10 million to transport last week becomes a very large, very expensive paperweight. It means contracts are breached. And when contracts of this magnitude are breached, the penalties are biblical. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the boardroom. The panoramic view of the city suddenly seemed mocking, a picture of a world that was blissfully unaware of the catastrophe unfolding within these four walls. What do you want, Mr. Thorne? Harrison finally asked. The question was a surrender. What I want, Thorne said, is for Alani to tell me what she wants, but I'll tell you what's going to happen. First, you will fire Sharon Miller. Not suspend, not reassign. Fire. Her termination letter will cite gross misconduct and violation of federal and international travel agreements. Second, you will issue an immediate public apology from your CEO, Sir Richard Powell, directly to Dr. Reed. It will acknowledge the racial bias inherent in the incident. My communications team will have final approval on the text. Ben Carter, the head of PR, shook his head violently, mouthing no way. A public admission of racial bias was corporate suicide. Thorne seemed to sense the hesitation. Third, he continued, his voice hardening further, your airline is going to feel this. The billion-dollar stock freeze was the opening salvo, a shot across the bow. My board has authorized me to divest our entire portfolio of TIA stock and cancel all existing and future corporate travel contracts. That's about $200 million a year in revenue for you. We were also about to sign that freight expansion deal for our European distribution. That's off the table. We'll go with Lufthansa. They'll be thrilled. Michael Sterling, the CFO, looked like he was going to be physically ill. He started scribbling frantic calculations on a notepad. The numbers were catastrophic. And finally, Thorne said, delivering the killing blow, Dr. Reed will require a new visa. The British Home Office is fast-tracking an emergency replacement, but it must be collected in person from the British Consulate General here in New York. You will arrange for a private jet to be waiting at Teterboro Airport, not JFK, Teterboro. It will fly Dr. Reed to London tonight. Your CEO, Sir Richard Powell, will be at Heathrow to meet her on the tarmac and apologize in person. These are not requests, Harrison. They are my terms for even considering halting the financial bleeding you are currently experiencing. You have 1 hour to confirm compliance. The line went dead. James Harrison slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. He looked around the room at his shell-shocked executive team. The mahogany table felt less like a seat of power and more like the plank of a pirate ship. Get me David Chen at JFK, Harrison said, his voice a strained rasp. Find out what Dr. Reed wants, and for God's sake get a car ready, a nice one. And someone get Sir Richard on the phone. Tell him he needs to get to Heathrow. He sank into his chair, the weight of the disaster settling upon him. It was a perfect storm. A low-level employee's casual act of racism had collided with the unforgiving, high-stakes world of global technology and finance. The resulting explosion was now threatening to tear his company apart, and it all centered on one woman, a woman who, until an hour ago, none of them had ever heard of. A woman who was currently standing at a gate in Terminal 4, holding the fate of their airline in the palm of her hand. While the corporate leadership of Transatlantic Air was in meltdown, the consequences of Sharon Miller's actions were rippling outwards, disrupting the lives of hundreds of people in increasingly chaotic ways. At Gate B23, the passengers of Flight 101 were growing restless. What began as a moment of shocking drama had devolved into a tedious, indefinite delay. The flight crew, including the captain, had emerged from the jet bridge, their faces etched with confusion. All they knew was that the OCC had issued an indefinite ground hold on their aircraft. No reason was given. "What's going on?" A man in a tweed jacket asked the beleaguered duty manager, David Chen. "Are we flying today or not?" "We are working to resolve the situation, sir," David said, repeating the empty corporate phrase for the 20th time. His focus, however, was entirely on Dr. Alani Reed. After the initial groveling apology, he had offered her a seat in the exclusive first-class lounge, a bottle of champagne, anything. Alani had politely declined. She remained standing near the gate, a picture of composure. She wasn't being difficult. She was simply observing. She was a systems engineer watching a system fail, tracing the fault lines, calculating the cascading points of failure. Her personal feelings, the humiliation, the anger, were compartmentalized. This was now a data set, an event to be analyzed. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Status update," he said without preamble. "The board is with me. Harrison is rattled. They're complying with the initial terms. Jet is being arranged. Powell is being summoned. The stock halt is holding. The apology draft will be on its way to your inbox shortly. Now for the important part. What do you need, Alani?" Alani looked around the gate area. She saw the frustrated families, the anxious business travelers, the tired flight attendants. She saw the ecosystem that Sharon's prejudice had poisoned. "The passengers, Marcus," she said softly. "They're all stranded because of me, because of what she did." "That's not on you, Alani. That's on Transatlantic Air and their toxic corporate culture that allows an employee like Sharon Miller to be in a position of authority." "I know," Alani said, "but I want them taken care of. Full refunds for everyone on this flight, and rebooking on the next available flights with other carriers if necessary, at Transatlantic's expense, and premium hotel vouchers and meal stipends for everyone who is stranded overnight." "Done," Marcus said instantly. "I'll add it to the list of demands. Harrison will agree to anything right now. Anything else?" Alani thought for a moment. "Yes. I want to know what happens to Sharon Miller." "She's already being processed for termination," Marcus said, "but I have a feeling that's just the beginning of her problems." He was right. In a small windowless security office in the bowels of Terminal 4, Sharon Miller was experiencing the complete and terrifying evaporation of her authority. The two security men who had escorted her there had left her in the custody of a severe-looking woman from Human Resources who had driven in from the corporate office in Queens, and a man who introduced himself as being from the airline's legal department. "I want my union rep," Sharon demanded, her voice shrill. She had been trying to project outrage, but fear was rapidly eating away at the foundations of her indignation. "You are welcome to call your union representative, Miss Miller." The lawyer, a man named Arthur Graves, said calmly. "However, I should inform you that this is no longer just an internal disciplinary matter." He slid a tablet across the table to her. On the screen was a press release from the office of the New York Attorney General. The headline read, "NYAG launches investigation into Transatlantic Air following allegations of discriminatory practices and potential hate crime at JFK Airport." Sharon's blood ran cold. "Hate crime? That's ridiculous. I was following procedure." "Were you?" Arthur Graves asked, his tone silky but dangerous. "Was it procedure to demand to see a visa that is only required to be inspected by UK Border Force? Was it procedure to publicly question a passenger's credentials? Was it procedure to physically destroy a legal travel document? Because our operations manual, which you signed off on every year for the past 22 years, says otherwise. It explicitly warns against this kind of profiling." The HR woman, Linda, cleared her throat. "Sharon, we have your file. There have been complaints, 15 passenger complaints over the last 5 years. Allegations of rudeness, aggressive questioning. A notable pattern has emerged. The majority of the complainants were people of color." "They were difficult passengers," Sharon protested, her voice cracking. "They had chips on their shoulders." "Or perhaps," Arthur Graves countered, "you treated them differently, and today, you did it to the wrong person." Dr. Alani Reed is not just some tourist. She is, for all intents and purposes, a strategic asset for both the US and UK governments. By destroying her visa, you may have violated federal law pertaining to the interference with international commerce and critical infrastructure projects. Sharon stared at him, her mind unable to process the scale of what he was saying. Critical infrastructure? She said she was an engineer. She is the lead architect of a quantum computing system that governments would go to war over, you fool. Arthur snapped, his professional calm finally cracking. He took a deep breath, composing himself. Miss Miller, your employment with Transatlantic Air is terminated, effective immediately for gross misconduct. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. You will be escorted from the premises and your airport security clearance is permanently revoked. I would also strongly advise you to retain a criminal defense attorney. The airline will not be providing you with one. Our legal duty is to the corporation, and you have exposed this corporation to billions of dollars in liability. We consider you a hostile party. The word billions hung in the air. Sharon felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. It was all a misunderstanding, a ridiculous overreaction, all because she'd tried to put some arrogant woman in her place. The consequences were also hitting home for her colleagues. The entire gate staff for Flight 101 was pulled from duty and sent for emergency retraining on discrimination and passenger rights. David Chen, the duty manager, was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his oversight of the terminal staff. The ripple effect was spreading, a virus of accountability tearing through the system. Back upstairs, James Harrison had finally gotten off the phone with his CEO. The call had been brutal. He now had his marching orders. He called David Chen's cell phone. David, it's James Harrison. What is the situation with Dr. Reed? She's calm, sir, David stammered. She's just standing here, waiting. All right. Listen to me very carefully, David. You are to announce to all passengers on Flight 101 that the flight is canceled due to unforeseen operational issues. Announce that the airline is providing full refunds, rebooking on any carrier, and full compensation for hotels and meals for those affected. There is no budget limit on this, just fix it, do you understand? David was stunned. Yes, sir. Full refunds and compensation. Understood. Good. Now, walk over to Dr. Reed. I am going to speak to her directly through your phone. David's hand was shaking as he approached Alani. Dr. Reed, Mr. James Harrison, our senior VP, would like to speak with you. Alani took the phone. This is Alani Reed. Dr. Reed. Harrison's voice was strained, heavy with the weight of corporate humility. I cannot begin to express how sorry I am for the despicable treatment you received from my employee. It is inexcusable and represents a catastrophic failure on our part. It does, Alani agreed, her voice neutral. We have complied with all of Mr. Thorne's initial requests, Harrison continued, desperate to show contrition. Miss Miller has been terminated. A private jet is on standby at Teterboro. We are arranging for the collection of your new visa. Your fellow passengers are being fully compensated for the disruption. Sir Richard Powell is on his way to Heathrow to meet you. He paused, bracing himself. What else, Dr. Reed? What else can we do to begin to make this right? Alani was silent for a long moment. She looked at the chaos around her, the relieved but weary passengers lining up for vouchers, the stressed airline staff trying to manage the fallout. This was more than just about her. It was about the Sharons of the world and the systems that enabled them. This isn't just about one employee, Mr. Harrison, Alani said, her voice clear and strong. This is about a culture. Your company is sick. Firing Sharon Miller is like removing a single tumor from a body riddled with cancer. It doesn't solve the underlying disease. Harrison felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. This was not going to be solved with money and a private jet. What do you propose, Doctor? He asked, his voice resigned. I'm still thinking, Alani replied. But it will be structural, it will be public, and it will be permanent. She handed the phone back to a wide-eyed David Chen. The immediate crisis may have been contained, but the real negotiation, the one that would truly define the price of prejudice, was just about to begin. The black Lincoln Navigator that whisked Alani away from JFK was an island of silent, leather-scented calm in the midst of the storm she had unleashed. A representative from Etheria Solutions' New York office sat in the passenger seat, a silent, reassuring presence. They sped through the city, heading not for Teterboro just yet, but for the imposing building of the British Consulate General in Midtown. The emergency visa was ready. The British government, it turned out, moved with astonishing speed when a cornerstone of their technological future was at stake. As the car moved through the city, Alani's phone was a constant stream of information. Marcus had forwarded her the draft of Transatlantic Air's public apology. She read it, made a few sharp, incisive edits, and sent it back. She changed "we regret the incident" to "we condemn the racist actions of our employee." She added a sentence committing the airline to a root and branch review of our diversity and inclusion policies. She was no longer just the victim of the system. She was now its auditor. The real reckoning, however, was happening in the place Alani had just left behind. Sharon Miller, stripped of her credentials and her career, was escorted out of a side exit of the airport, not as a respected supervisor, but as a pariah. The reality of her situation was beginning to crash down on her with the force of a physical blow. Her job of 22 years was gone. Her pension was in jeopardy, and the phrase "criminal defense attorney" echoed in her mind. She sat on a bench at a bus stop just outside the airport perimeter, the roar of departing jets now a mocking soundtrack to her ruin. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling, and called her husband, Tom. "They fired me," she sobbed into the phone. "They fired me over some misunderstanding with a passenger." "What? Fired you? For what?" Tom's voice was a mixture of confusion and anger. "Sharon, what did you do?" She tried to explain, but her words tumbled out in a defensive, self-pitying jumble. "This woman, she was so arrogant, Tom. She had this fancy visa and was acting all high and mighty. I tore it. I didn't mean to, it just ripped." The lie was reflexive, a desperate attempt to paint herself as the victim. But the world was already moving on without her. The news was breaking. A junior reporter from a financial news wire who had a source at the NYSE had gotten the first part of the story, the mysterious massive stock freeze on Transatlantic Air. He'd started digging. A source inside JFK security tipped him off about a major incident at Gate B-23 involving a high-profile passenger. The pieces began to click into place. By the time Sharon's bus arrived, the first online articles were appearing. Transatlantic Air stock halted after incident with Tech VIP. Airline embroiled in racism scandal. Her name wasn't in the first wave of reports, but she knew it was only a matter of time. The anonymity she had always taken for granted was about to be violently stripped away. The reckoning for Transatlantic Air was far more calculated and far more expensive. In the 50th-floor boardroom, James Harrison presided over what felt like a war council. The list of demands from Etheria Solutions, via Alani Reed, was now on the table. "She wants what?" The head of legal, Maria Flores, exclaimed, reading from the email on her tablet. "A $5 million endowment to fund scholarships for black women in STEM programs at MIT, to be called the Dr. Alani Reed Catalyst Fund. Paid in full by Transatlantic Air," Harrison confirmed, his voice flat. "And this," Maria continued, her voice rising in disbelief, "she's demanding we submit to a third-party audit of our hiring, promotion, and disciplinary practices to be conducted by a firm of her choosing, with the full unredacted report to be made public." "That's career suicide," Ben Carter, the PR head, muttered. "We'll be crucified." "We are already being crucified," Harrison shot back. "The alternative is a full-scale corporate war with Etheria Solutions, a public lawsuit from Dr. Reed, and an ongoing investigation by the Attorney General. This audit, as painful as it will be, gives us a sliver of a chance to control the narrative, to frame it as yous taking proactive steps." The final demand was the most ambitious. Alani was requiring that a permanent, independent civilian oversight committee be established to review passenger complaints of discrimination. The committee would have the power to compel testimony from airline staff and recommend binding disciplinary action. Its members would be civil rights leaders, academics, and legal experts, not airline insiders. "She's rewriting our corporate governance," Michael Sterling, the CFO, said in awe, from a gate at JFK. "She's fixing the system," Harrison corrected him, a note of grudging respect in his voice. "She found the bug, and now she's writing the patch." He looked around the table. "We have no choice. We agree to all of it, every last word. Send the confirmation to Thorne, and release the public apology, with her edits, now." As the corporate machinery ground into motion to accept these humbling terms, Alani was stepping out of the British consulate, her new visa safely in her wallet. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows between the Manhattan skyscrapers. The city was aglow with 1,000,000 lights, a vast, complex system humming with energy. She got back in the waiting Navigator, which now headed for the private airfield at Teterboro. The Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming on the tarmac, a sleek, powerful machine ready to slice through the night sky. As she boarded, the flight attendant greeted her with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reed. Sir Richard Powell has confirmed he will be meeting you personally upon your arrival at Heathrow." Alani simply nodded and took her seat in the plush leather chair. As the jet began to taxi, her phone buzzed one last time. It was a news alert. Her name and Sharon Miller's were now public. The story had gone viral. #JusticeForderReed and #FireSharon were trending on Twitter. The court of public opinion was in session, and its verdict was swift and brutal. A photo of Sharon, likely from her social media, was already circulating. In it, she was smiling at a backyard barbecue, looking perfectly ordinary. But the comments below were a torrent of fury. Her life, as she knew it, was over. She had become a meme, a symbol of petty prejudice, a cautionary tale for the digital age. Alani looked out the window as the jet lifted off, the lights of New York shrinking below her. She felt no joy, no sense of victory, just a profound and weary sadness. She hadn't asked for this fight, but when it came to her, she had finished it. She had rebooted the system, but the source code of human bias was notoriously difficult to rewrite. The cost had been high, for everyone. For Sharon Miller, a life ruined. For transatlantic air, a $1 billion lesson in humility. And for Alani herself, the loss of her quiet, orderly world. She was no longer just a brilliant scientist. She was now a symbol, and symbols, she knew, rarely get to live quiet lives. The flight to London would be smooth and fast, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the turbulence was far from over. Karma, Alani had always thought, was not some mystical cosmic force, but rather the logical Newtonian consequence of one's actions. For every action, an equal and opposite reaction. Sharon Miller had committed an act of targeted malicious force. The reaction, when it came, was equal in its target, opposite in its direction, and utterly devastating in its magnitude. The days and weeks that followed the incident at JFK were a relentless cascade of consequences for the former gate agent. The termination of her employment was just the first stone in an avalanche. Her husband, Tom, a man who worked in construction and valued straightforward, uncomplicated strength, found himself unable to comprehend the situation. His first reaction was to defend his wife. "It's a witch hunt," he'd bellow to anyone who would listen. "My wife is not a racist." But the evidence was overwhelming. The story, now a global phenomenon, was dissected on 24-hour news channels. An old classmate of Alani's from MIT, now a prominent data scientist, published a blog post detailing Alani's achievements, painting a picture of a generational genius. This contrasted sharply with the emerging portrait of Sharon. The 15 prior complaints, leaked by an anonymous source within TAA's beleaguered HR department, created an undeniable pattern. The public shaming was brutal. Their home address was discovered and posted on a fringe forum, leading to a deluge of hate mail, and on one terrifying evening, a brick thrown through their living room window with the word racist scrawled on it. Tom, who had lived in the same quiet Queens neighborhood his entire life, found himself being shunned at the local diner. His co-workers on the construction site would fall silent when he approached. The shame was a toxic cloud that enveloped their entire family. Their 2 grown children, a son in Chicago and a daughter in Florida, were horrified. They called, their voices a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Mom, what did you do?" her daughter cried. "My friends are sending me articles. My boss asked me if Sharon Miller, the racist gate agent, was related to me." The financial fallout was just as grim. Without Sharon's income and with her pension benefits under review, due to the nature of her termination, their finances, already tight, began to collapse. The first sign of the true depth of their new reality came with a letter from a law firm representing Transatlantic Air. The airline was suing Sharon Miller personally. The lawsuit argued that her willful and malicious misconduct had directly caused the company quantifiable financial harm. They cited the cost of the private jet, the compensation paid to the 200-plus passengers of Flight 101, the $5 million endowment to the Dr. Alani Reed Catalyst Fund, the multi-million-dollar cost of the public audit, and the initial loss in market capitalization. The total they were seeking was a staggering $25 million. It was a legal maneuver designed more for public relations than for actual collection, a way for TAA to publicly distance itself from its former employee. But the effect on Sharon was the same. It promised total financial annihilation. Then came the criminal charges. The New York Attorney General, spurred by the immense public pressure and the clear evidence, charged Sharon with a hate crime, coercion in the 2nd degree with a hate crime enhancement, as well as criminal mischief. The destruction of the visa was not just oops. It was a targeted act intended to prevent Alani from exercising her right to travel, based on a perception of her race. Sharon's life became a series of humiliating appointments with a court-appointed defense attorney, who looked at her with a mixture of pity and exasperation. The trial was short. The video from the gate security camera, which had no audio but clearly showed Sharon's deliberate tearing motion and subsequent smirk, was played for the jury. David Chen, the former duty manager, testified under subpoena, recounting the events. A deposition from Alani, given remotely from London, was read into the record. It was factual, dispassionate, and damning. Sharon was found guilty. The judge, a stern woman who had seen her share of racial animus in her courtroom, delivered a searing sentencing statement. "You were a gatekeeper, Miss Miller," she said, her voice ringing with contempt. "A gatekeeper to travel, to opportunity. And you used that small measure of power not to serve but to wound. You saw a woman of color, a woman of immense achievement, and you sought to diminish her, to ground her. You are a symbol of a casual, thoughtless bigotry that we can no longer tolerate." She sentenced Sharon Miller to 18 months in state prison. The sentence was a shock. For a nonviolent first-time offender, it was harsh. But the judge made it clear the severity was for the hate crime enhancement. It was a message. As Sharon was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, she finally broke. The sneering defiance, the self-pity, it all dissolved into raw, gut-wrenching sobs. This was her new reality. A prison cell, a ruined family, a name that would forever be synonymous with racism. This was the equal and opposite reaction to her moment of ugly triumph at Gate B23. Meanwhile, in London, Dr. Alani Reed was stepping onto a stage at the Royal Institution to a standing ovation. Project Chimera had been successfully activated. The world was on the cusp of a new technological age, and she was its architect. She had overseen the implementation of the sweeping changes at Transatlantic Air, occasionally reviewing the audit reports and the progress of the Oversight Committee. The Dr. Alani Reed Catalyst Fund had awarded its first scholarships to a group of brilliant, ambitious young black women who saw Alani not just as a scientist, but as a hero. She never spoke of Sharon Miller publicly again. She didn't need to. The system she had been forced to confront had, in the end, corrected itself with a ruthless logic that was almost mathematical in its precision. The karma was not mystical, it was methodical. It was the hard, unyielding, and inescapable consequence of a single hateful choice. Sharon Miller had tried to tear up Alani Reed's future, and in doing so, had irrevocably shredded her own. This wasn't just a story about an argument at an airport. It was a story about the hidden systems of power and prejudice that operate all around us, every single day. It shows how one person's quiet dignity in the face of ugly racism can become a catalyst for monumental change. Dr. Alani Reed didn't just win a battle for herself. She forced a billion-dollar corporation and the public to confront a difficult truth. The consequences for the gate agent were severe, a stark reminder that actions, especially those fueled by hate, have powerful and life-altering reactions. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing up to injustice, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And for more true stories of karma, accountability, and the fight for justice, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories.